Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
I apologize, sir. I will not be able to turn on my camera because of some network issues, but we can start now. I will give a brief introduction and then you can go on.
Okay.
Good evening to everyone who is with us today. We are also live on YouTube. Today, we are joined for this discussion by Professor Kaushik Bandyopadhyay. For those of you who don't know, Kaushik Bandyopadhyay is a distinguished professor at West Bengal State University, specializing in modern South Asia. His academic interests lie at the intersection of sports, culture, and nationalism, with a particular focus on football and cricket in South Asia. He has authored and co authored several notable books, including Mahatma on the Pitch, Gandhi and Cricket in India, Sport, Culture and Nation Perspectives from Indian Football and South Asian Cricket, and Bangladesh Playing Sport, Culture, Nation. His seminal work, Scoring Off the Field Football Culture in Bengal 1911 to 1980, is a pivotal contribution to understanding the socio cultural significance of football in Bengal. Additionally, he co authored Goalless, the story of a unique footballing nation with Boria Muzumdar, exploring the nuances of football culture. Professor Bandyopadhyay's scholarship critically examines the role of sports as a lens to understand broader societal and cultural shifts, making him a prominent voice in the field of sports history and cultural studies in South Asia. So I request you to go on with today's discussion on the Justice for Arjikor movement.
Thank you, Shanton, for your generous introduction. I thank uh, the voices of the periphery. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Ayush for giving me this opportunity to speak on a subject which probably has become very, very crucial in understanding contemporary Bengali society in the last 3 months or so. Uh, uh, I was very excited when my proposal to Ayush that I'd be speaking on Arjikar movement was accepted because I know that speaking from a historical perspective on something which is an ongoing process still happening is difficult for many historical organizations to accept. I thank them for giving me this opportunity. Now, I recollect with pleasure actually what happened nearly 2 decades back in my own research career. I wrote an article on 2004 India Pakistan cricket and India's tour of Pakistan a few months after the tour was completed. And then some people, actually, some of my teachers, friends, and colleagues uh, mm, uh, actually raised questions about my scholarship, uh, telling me very clearly that I was not doing history, but probably political science or international relations. In 2007, again, I did the same thing. I tried to study Calcutta CAB elections, that is Cricket Association of Bengal elections, in which the political rift between the then left front government and the CAB chief Jagmohan Dalmia came up on the scene, came to the fore, and created bitter rivalry within the rank and file of the left front. So I was considered by many as a propagandist, not a historian, not a student of history. But I recall this with pleasure because at that point of time, I already decided that we have been too late to understand the significance of contemporary history. And I was confirmed that my way probably was the right way. Now, when I started my student career in the Scottish Church College, oh, we used to study. In fact, everybody who studies history studies international relations and at some point of time India's foreign policy. I asked many of my teachers that why do we study international relations and India's foreign policy? In most cases, the answer was that these are very, very important aspects of India's history, and we cannot exclude it from the syllabus. But they never told me what they never told me is the fact that it was something which should be included in research on history as well. uh, Gradually, as the 21st century progresses, we have found that history of post-colonial India or even history of 21st century India is gradually being taken into account by scholars who are working on Indian history, not to speak of history outside India. So this much as an introduction, anecdotal introduction to my discussion today. Now, what I will do is to divide my talk today in two parts. In the first part, I will talk about the idea of contemporary history, how I understand this particular idea, what may be a useful definition of contemporary history, what are the methods of studying contemporary history, and probably a bit on the scope and problems and prospects of studying contemporary history. In the second part, I will use the Arjikar movement in West Bengal since 9th August, probably till 21st October, which I call the first phase of the movement, to show whether at all we can study this movement or not, and then probably a bit about the origins, or the nature of popular participation and impact of the movement. So let me start with two pivotal comments in understanding contemporary history. The two major works on the study of contemporary history came out in the 1960s, the decade when E.H. Carroll was also delivering the lectures on what is history. First was by one of the renowned Indian historians, Rajnipam Dutt, in his less celebrated work, Problems of Contemporary History. He commented that contemporary history is a dangerous subject to handle. It is full of explosive material. On the other hand, you have a very classic comment on contemporary history by none other than Geoffrey Barraclough, whose An Introduction to Contemporary History came out in 1964. He commented the contemporary history is different in quality and content from what we know as modern history. So you can probably understand the study of contemporary history is nothing new. Uh, in my opinion, it began when the study of history began. Herodotus and Thucydides in the Greek world were doing nothing but contemporary history, using methods which we often call the methods given to us, given to the historians by sister social sciences like ethnography or oral history. But both Herodotus and Thucydides used these methods. Anyway, let me move on to the major objectives or issues that one confronts while studying contemporary history. The first important issue is how to address the long debated question of what is actually meant by contemporary in contemporary history. So, it is important to understand the nature of contemporaneity or contemporariness with a focus on post colonial India. Secondly, some basic ideas about the definition, time frame, and scope of contemporary history. Uh, Next, what are the problems and prospects of studying it in the Indian context, not to speak of the global context? And in doing so, how could a historian engage with a variety of methods to study the contemporary history of India? And last but not the least, what are the diverse themes, variegated themes in the study of contemporary history of India? So let me start with a very brief idea about the operative definition that contemporary history could be given. Say from the 1960s onwards, when the Institute of Contemporary History was first established and the Journal on Contemporary History was floated, it was primarily the history of the 20th century that was emphasized upon. Uh, for one of the greatest Cold War historians like Louis J. Halley, contemporary history was the history of, I quote, history of our present times. So the difference between the contemporary history and current events was clearly noted by people like Halley. On the other hand, Barakla clearly stated that contemporary history begins when the problems which are actual in the world today first took visible shape. Uh, and to quote R.P. Dutt again, in pure logic, contemporary history might be declared to be only the history of what is already happening at the moment of writing. It may be regarded as recent modern history, a very interesting term he uses, with a more elastic definition of what is recent. So uh, it's difficult to always define the term recent in terms of a time frame. So this brings me to the time frame of the past. Now, historians always deal with the past, so there is always this complicated web of periodization in history, transcending time, spaces, and so on. But there can be different terms which we use to understand the past, the nature of the past, the remoteness of the past. It could be prehistory, remote or ancient past. In case of India, we often use early medieval, medieval, late medieval, early modern, modern, and then of course colonial, early and late colonial, and post-colonial India. But this idea of past should not be taken at a face value, because we have several adjectives to identify the nature of the past, like recent past, immediate past, instant past, generational past. So, the idea of past can convey different meanings to different people, and the way a researcher takes the idea of the past in terms of her or his research. So, uh, to speak very clearly, to put it in a frame, contemporary history probably refers to that part of modern history which is nearest to us in time. But I will, in the end of my talk, introduce you probably to a very innovative idea which most of the people probably would not agree to, the idea of the future past. I will come to that later. So, if we take contemporary past or recent past as a viable idea for understanding contemporary history, there are several problems that come to the fore. For example, the term contemporary suffers from non clarity. It's not really clarified in any way by any standard history, historical text. So the vagueness of the content and the haziness of the limits of contemporary history definitely give it a major problem. But as Barakla stated once, that the word contemporary inevitably means different things to different people. So what is contemporary for me will not necessarily be contemporary for you, and that does not have to be. So usefulness of the time frame of recent modern history, in my opinion, can give us a way forward. So it is a separate, a new period in one way. On the other hand, it may be an extension of modern history. I propose to think of contemporary history in this way. This is my definition. It is a history of past few decades, starting with certain markers of change in a period of transition up to the present time, with an uncertain and elastic time frame, which may vary according to changing priorities of time, space, and situation. So this is the way we can probably approach contemporary history, and we have to keep in mind that it sets out to clarify the basic structural changes which have shaped the modern world, particularly our time. Next, I come to the most important problems of research, and these problems are those issues by which conventional historians always try to nullify any attempt to study contemporary history. In India, that particular trend is still continuing. Again, I come back to Rajnipam Dutt's very interesting comment. Anyone who attempts to write contemporary history in any more durable form than a current journalistic article is laying his or her head on the block for the executioner. So you can understand how risky it is to pursue contemporary history, because people at most of the times used to consider stuff of contemporary history as current affairs. They are too much engaged with the idea of a completed process. There is a lack of archival material, or so on. So contemporary history used to be rejected on the ground that it is not a serious discipline, to be little more than propaganda or desultory comment on current affairs. So the dichotomy between a long term and short term continued to haunt the contemporary historian. Now, while we try to understand or study the nature of the past in contemporary history, studying the present, not falling in the domain of the historian, was given also as another important cause for not studying contemporary history, because here the present and the past are integrally connected. Now, with regard to the problem of time frame and veridization, I have already mentioned that there is no clearly definable or definitive time frame for contemporary history. So the critics always emphasize on an extension of modern period of history and try to suggest that there is no need to talk about contemporary in that context. But more serious problems crop up when the problem of distance from the past events, processes, developments, personalities, etc., come to the fore. It is said that the dispassionate attachment or detachment, rather, in terms of temporal distance, cannot be maintained in the writing of contemporary history, because that would not become objective. Although objectivity is an elusive experience for the historian at all points of time. Also, I have already mentioned that there is a problem of studying contemporary history because it is a quote unquote incomplete process. So, again, the ambivalence and viability of the idea of a completed process calls for our attention. Next comes the difficulties of methodology, an interpretative framework which leads to methodological problems. Because in contemporary history, what if you are trying to study, say, for example, Arjikar movement, you lack historical perspective, and also you may lack or there is an absence of deficiency of technique with a larger bulk of materials. This brings me to the probably the most serious offense against the contemporary historian, that the contemporary historian lacks a full range of sources required for a scientific and objective study of history. So, paucity of archival or official materials is always cited as a major problem. But on the other hand, we all know that when we study 21st century India, or say any topic of 21st century India, we are actually offered with superabundant of sources. There has always been this 30-year or 25 years thumb rule. You won't get access to many archival materials. In fact, there are materials which you will never get access to. Think of China, or at one point of time the Soviet Union, or even now India's foreign policy documents. So the absurdity of the idea of a full range of sources or all relevant primary sources seems to me quite stupid. Next, I come to the two stakeholders, major stakeholders in writing and reading contemporary history. You have, on the one hand, the critical readers who become active participants with strong opinions on a subject which the historian is studying. Naturally, their passion, partisanship, and partiality come strongly in the way of reading the, research paper or a work with strong political or ideological loyalty and preconceived notions. On the other hand, you have a greater danger lurking in the subjectivity of the historian. The historian can always become vulnerable to partisanship and prejudice because maybe of her or his loyalty to political ideology or political party, maybe greater involvement in contemporary issues. So there has always been a problem of politicization in different ways. So the danger of dealing with a fast changing world is qualitatively different from the easygoing mood of the historians with regard to the past world. So there may be also a futuristic vision which is hidden in the study of contemporary history, which may open up spaces of speculative and conjectural history. So that is something which, according to many, we need to avoid. So where do I come now? What is contemporary history in the global context and what is contemporary history in the Indian context? It may not necessarily be the same. Now, in my opinion, 1990s to 2020s, these probably these 3 decades around, can be considered to be contemporary history in the context of global history. Why? Because of the changes rather than continuities that mark the onset of contemporary history of this time. Now, I referred to certain very important changes of the 1990s, breakup of the Soviet Union, end of the Cold War, spectre of American omnipotence, onset of liberalization, privatization, globalization, revolution in information technology, growth of terrorism. All these markers of the 1990s created the new 21st century, which was strikingly different from the 20th century, just as the post Second World War world was different from the pre Second World War world. So, major changes in international politics and relations, transformation in global economic movements, changing patterns of social transition and cultural evolution give me the confidence to study contemporary history in the global context from the 1990s onwards till date. With regard to post-colonial India, I do not consider, I categorically state this, I do not consider the entire history of post-colonial India to be the stuff of contemporary history. Time has actually gone too far. So there is no point talking about 1950s, 60s, and 70s as the cup of tea for the contemporary historian. Uh, Ramchandra Guha, in one of his celebrated articles published in 2007, talked about 1947, 15th August as a Lakshman Rekha, which the historian needs to actually cross. And the historians crossed it uh, definitely from the 1990s onwards. But again, here also I differ from Guho in his categorical statement that historians need a generation's distance to study contemporary history. I don't agree with him. In my opinion, it's again early 1990s to early 2020s, which actually define contemporary history for the Indian context. Why? Because, as I've already mentioned, the end of the Cold War and the challenge of a new world order faced by India in the 1990s created new options for the Indian state, Indian economy, Indian society to adapt to a new changing global order. The transformation of Indian politics, the emergence of multi-party democracy, the rise of Bharatiya Janata Party with a strong religious, cultural, nationalist agenda. India hit hard by terrorism from the beginning of the early 1990s. India's adoption of the policy of economic liberalization, India's nuclear status, India's engagement with information technology revolution, with telecommunication, satellite television, internet, and digital revolution, actually turned India into a different proposition in the 21st century. That's why I start with the 1990s. So, uh, this is how I perceive contemporary history in terms of an elastic time frame. Again, I state clearly that it can be different from any other person pursuing contemporary history in a specific context. So, contemporary history is different, as Baraklo stated, in quality and content from what we know as modern history. That is something which I still follow. But with regard to methodology, the contemporary historian has the greatest task ahead. She or he has to be innovative, creative, critical, objective, and scientific. Definitely, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary perspectives are used more frequently with fieldwork, surveys, participants' observation, ethnography, nethnography coming very handy for the contemporary historians. She or he also uses more and more comparative perspectives, that is, historical research in other contexts and research in other disciplines on the same subject or theme always helps. Very brief hint at the sources which become very useful for the contemporary historian because there is almost a superabundance of sources, although you don't have access to many archival materials. Government documents, public records, parliamentary sources, judicial sources, private papers, diaries, annuals, almanacs, guides. You have a thriving newspapers and periodical press, radio tapes, uh, everyday history in the media, audiovisual materials, journalistic accounts, party publications, popular writings, commentaries, foreign office documents, memoirs, autobiographical writings, literature, fictions. But what is most important, probably interesting to understand for the contemporary historian is that the idea of the archives has completely changed. We now confront the idea of archives on the run or ad hoc archives. That is, archives are picked up, sometimes literally, where they present themselves. You can actually come to terms with this kind of archives anytime in your research career. So, beyond institutional and private archives, you have several electronic archives now. Websites containing public, institutional, and private sources, documents, oral history, memory, ethnography, autoethnography, surveys, opinion polls, official statistics, television footages, YouTube videos, uh, different kinds of electronic resources, including 24 into news television footages, social media, the new electronic media, audiovisual materials, photography, and different kinds of cultural artifacts and expressions uh, become texts to understand contemporary history. So, this much for my brief discussion on the idea of contemporary history, how we probably can approach the study of contemporary history. Now, let me just give you a brief few examples, some thematic examples. What could be the cup of tea in the cup of tea of the contemporary historian in the context of India, and with special reference to West Bengal? For example, I would always suggest that the elections of 2019 or 2024 Lok Sabha elections and 2021 Vidhan Sabha elections definitely should be studied by the historian. Impact of COVID-19, the nature of COVID politics, demonetization, if we go a bit back, introduction of GST, uh, India's recent relations with Pakistan, China, and Bangladesh, the changing nature of political culture in 21st century India, uh, personalist politics and political fandom in contemporary India, the rise of BJP as opposition in West Bengal. So these all probably in the last one decade or so come into the pan of the contemporary historian. Let me now move on to the Justice for Arjikar movement. Now, at the very outset, I must make it very clear that this is not a talk on, as I mean, per se, on Arjikar movement. There are certain questions first we need to ask ourselves, that whether first and foremost should a researcher in history study the movement? I say definitely yes. Then why should we study the movement? What is the timeline or time frame to be studied? What or which aspects can we study about the movement? I mean, in terms of, say, origins, trends, nature, or early impact. And last but not the least, how can we study the movement? What should be the methodology? I will come to the methodology later on. Now, as we all know about what is the movement, that it was the rape and murder of a young lady doctor that ignited the minds of the people of West Bengal, that led to the movement. But very closely connected with this incident was the alleged attempts to protect the criminals who suppress the truth. That's how the movement gained in momentum. Now, the what led to the protest, quite similarly probably, and the subsequent movement, it was the incident itself and the way the incident was handled by the administration that created utmost confusion and raised many questions in the people's minds, and pointed to a lack of transparency in the process, with the apprehension that justice would elude us, which is still a truth. So that's the background that led to the movement, the protest movement. Then we come to the course of the movement. I mean, the stages, major incidents, milestones of the movement, which need to be narrated when you are studying the movement. I can refer to a few, and I can take the deadline of say 9th August 2024 to 21st October, when the first incident took place, to the withdrawal of the doctors' hunger strike on 21st October 2024. Uh, Definitely, first that comes to my mind is the Raat Dakhol, claiming the night, which again is probably taking place tonight at several places in Kolkata and its outskirts. Then processions and meetings, junior doctor strike, Manav Bandhon, that is the human chain, the protest on the date of a derby match, which was withdrawn by the government, Shastro Bhavan sit-in strike, which went on for quite some time. There were gheraos around the CGO complex and certain other places. Then the Amaron Onoshon, fasting until death by the junior doctors. And probably the last significant straw was the Droher Carnival, that is the Carnival of Revolt. There could be many other such incidents which could be included in this list of trains of protests. But what these different incidents or different, say, stages of the movement or milestones of the movement bring to light are the key dimensions or characteristics of the movement. Definitely, it was primarily a doctors' movement from the beginning till date, but it was transformed into a citizens or civil society movement, a movement by the citizens in different parts of West Bengal, even outside West Bengal, or which reached different parts of the world as well. Now, the question arises what the protesters were protesting against, the key issues in the movement. I believe if you I have not studied the movement as such in greater length, but this is only a lens for me to understand whether the movement could be studied or not, and how we can study it. Probably the three most important issues are the rape and murder, women's and in fact human security in the state, and anomalies in the health system. There can be other issues as well. Now, if we look at the probably the most significant aspect of the movement, in my view, is the nature of the movement, or particularly the nature of public participation, popular participation in the movement. Now, the major stakeholders or participants of the movement definitely refer to the role played by the doctors and health workers, women, students, civil society, and selected cross sections of the people or masses. But there are definitely from the very beginning, even now, there are passive or non-participant people. For example, I won't say that there was no impact in these sectors, but the impact was minimal. Rural society, including peasants and village folk, urban poor and the laborers, tribal people, Muslim masses. Now, one can say that there are examples to show that they did participate. I agree with that view, but it's not to the extent that we can say that the most of the community, most of the people in these categories took an important part in the movement. Next comes the nature of protest. How did the participants, protester, protest? And this brings me to the key features, mediums, or methods, and uniqueness of this present movement, present protest in historical perspective. Probably we can situate it very broadly and establish a connection with the previous popular protest movements in West Bengal, if not of India. This takes me back to the 1950s when the first popular movements began to emerge in West Bengal. I recall the movements of the teachers, by the tram workers, the food movements, by the Naxalite movements, to the citizens' protest in the 21st century, particularly in West Bengal, such as Shingur Nondigram, Nirbhaya, and then Hok Kolorab, probably in the recent past. So the potential of these movements, of the present movement, I mean the Arjikor movement, could have had a connection with the movements that preceded it. Also, there is a probably an argument that can be developed with regard to the potential impact of the recent protest movement in Bangladesh, which also reminds me of the Shahbag protest of the early 2010s, which led to the ouster of Sheikh Hasina on 5th August, 4 days before the incident took place at the Arjikar hospital. Now it also becomes important to understand the role of politics, particularly the state and the political parties with respect to the movement. Now, here the role of the government and the political parties uh, brings to us a very unique opportunity to study when both the state establishment and the political parties confront a very puzzling situation where they don't expect what they always expected to happen happens. Certain anti-government and anti-state character of the movement cannot be denied. The movement definitely turned anti-government, but at the same time, it turned anti-mainstream politics as well. The government, the state, definitely came up with a certain amount of politics of intimidation and suppression with respect to the movement. You know all the examples. the political parties, and I refer particularly to the oppositions, that they felt quite uneasy to negotiate with this unusually so-called apolitical character of the movement. The movement tried to remain apolitical. But is that really true? Can this kind of a movement remain apolitical? I don't think so. Protest politics and political protest uh, uh, create a new alternative domain of politics. I think in the context of the Arjikar movement, definitely this term apolitical, quote unquote, protest or politics gained in momentum during the course of the movement. Many commentators and scholars talked about this nature of the movement, despite this movement being anti-state and anti-government at certain points of time. But what is actually striking is the inability of the establishment to negotiate with the terms of the movement, as well as the failure of the opposition to appropriate the movement. It was an unknown, uneasy zone of politics for all the political parties in West Bengal, including the establishment power. So here emerges a new culture of protest, which is no less political, non-violent mostly, and particularly in the cultural sphere, which showed its strength. At the same time, it was accompanied by the new era digital protest using electronic media and social media. So I think it was definitely a political movement. It is still definitely a political movement. You don't need always to have political parties supporting you, or say political parties intruding into the protest to make it political. Now, finally, I come to the impact of the protest movement. Here, probably the major, I mean, problem arises whether we are in a position to study the impact of the movement. Probably to a very limited extent, because the impact we have seen, say, since 9th August, can probably be studied to a limited extent. It definitely creates a sphere of speculation and prediction that always takes you to the uncomfortable zone for the historian. History of speculation and conjectures we should not indulge in, but it is a study of a past in the present and in the future, uh, in this protest against systemic anomalies. And there is always the possibility of a merger with mainstream politics, which probably has not taken place to a great extent, to a good extent even. But similarly, a question arises whether it is really sustainable to have a apolitical, so-called apolitical protest in the long run without the support or without the mobilization by the political parties. That is to be seen in future. Finally, I come to the sources of study. And this is where probably Arjikar movement shows the potential of how contemporary history can be pursued with regard to really recent times. I mean, the year 2024 we are studying. Here I refer to again the oral histories, speeches, comments, interviews, which are available on the public domain, visual and photographic history, which to bring Hayden White reminds me of this genre of history of 40, electronic media, reportage and program footages, print media, press releases, social media, ethnography and autoethnography, which I personally have done, television archives, YouTube videos, different kinds of visual sources and video footages, official sources and correspondences, government and police notifications, court proceedings, live and recorded streaming, court papers and verdicts, cultural artifacts, expressions, and performances, including songs, poems, dances, skits, street plays, videos, slogans, paintings, sculpture, cartoons, and so on. So we can see that there are enough material to study this movement. Now, there can always be a kind of straitjacketing of contemporary history as not being not to be pursued because many of the archival stuff you won't get access to, and it is not. It has begun. It is not in full swing now, but it is yet to be seen what is going to be the future of the movement. I don't agree with them. I think it is useless to stick to this kind of rigid historical mindset. It is better to pursue it, create the narrative, and we are dealing with ever widening electronic media, social media. the primary sources that are coming out of it may not be available a decade later. If you wait for a decade, 20 years, 30 years, that's simply stupid. So whatever we can do, we have to do, and we have to do from the outset. So if we try to just kind of conclude regarding the movement, uh, it may be like that it is a spontaneous civic, that is citizens or civil society protest movement led by doctors with initial appeal towards and spread amongst a broader spectrum of masses across the state, with repercussions in many parts of the country and world, but ultimately confined primarily to doctors and urban middle classes, yet opening up an alternative domain of politics, posing challenges to conventional politics. So this can be a kind of, say, if you say, conclusion to the movement. But again, I have already mentioned that my aim is not to give you a kind of broader understanding of the movement itself. It is only a lens to understand how we can pursue contemporary history. Now, if it works for you, then I would like to share a few few important primary sources which actually help us uh, study contemporary history with regard to the Arjikor protest movement differently, innovatively, because that is how we have to move forward. So I'm just sharing my screen with you. Just give me a minute. Just check whether you can hear it or not. Many of you have listened to this, but to give you an exact understanding of how we can read the primary sources, use them. And the sound is there.
Yes, sir. It was
Okay,
audible
okay,
before.
okay.
It's not visible now. Sir, the screen you shared is not visible at the moment.
The screen is not showing.
No, sir. It
No,
was visible before, but now it's not.
okay. Do you have the sound?
No, sir. We don't have the sound either.
You don't have the sound. Okay, just give me a minute. Now,
Yes, sir, it is there now.
Okay.
চিনে গেছি শত্রু কারা, কারা আসল দোষী, রাত্রে কারা আধার নামায় আর কারা সাহসী। সুরক্ষা চাই, স্বাধীনতা চাই, জানতে চাই সত্যি, ধর্ষিতা নয়, অভয়াকে নয়, অপরাধীদের দোস্তি। আমরা পড়বো, লড়বো, আনবো নতুন আলোর মতো সকাল। তোরা মারবি যত, বাড়বে তত, ঘোচাবো এই আকাল। বলো থামবে কবে, এ অত্যাচার থামবে কবে, নামবে কবে? তুমি কোথায় নামবে কবে, থামবে কবে? নামবে কবে, জয়ের ডাকে পথের সাথে নামবে যবে। থামবে তবে এ অত্যাচার, থামবে তবেই, থামবে তবে মিথ্যার উপর সত্যের জয় আনবে যবে। থামবে তবে এ অত্যাচার, থামবে তবে এ অত্যাচার, থামবে তবে, থামবে তবে, থামবে তবে।
So this is a footage from actually Houston. Sorry, Houston. Next, I move to some photographs, particularly taken during the, on the day of the Derby match when the match was cancelled. Just check if you can see it. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, you know the Derby match takes place between Mohun Bagan and East Bengal in Calcutta. It is one of the classic rivalries across the football world, and the match was called off citing reasons of security. And how East Bengal and Mohun Bagan supporters came together along with the third main club of Calcutta, Mohammedan Sporting. These pictures, photographs are self-explanatory, so I don't need to probably comment on this. A Mohun Bagan supporter, an East Bengal supporter could never be seen in this way. Probably rarely have we come across these kinds of photographs. The Rakhi Bandhan is taking place. Both were taken by the police. হোক বৃষ্টি মাথায় তিন ভাই এক ছাতায়, that is three brothers, that is Mohun Bagan, East Bengal, Mohammedan, could have easily been three sisters. They were seeking justice. Now Mohun Bagan and East Bengal now come to form Mohun Bengal or East Bagan. These are some of the snaps from that particular afternoon. The supporters who were considered by the police to be creating trouble were taken to Lal Bazar. The flags of three clubs coming together for this particular cause. Again, from the police van, three clubs jerseys rubbing shoulders with each other. They want justice. The Indian flag, you can see a representation of Tilottama or Abhaya. It shows the unity of the three clubs, particularly Mohun Bagan and East Bengal, where they become united against a common cause. This was a few days after the Derby match, probably in Kollani, I think, in the stadium, where after scoring the goal, the players showed this, we want justice for Arjikar. And then a very interesting thing happened. The match was supposed to be telecast live, and that was stopped. This is from television footage. This is one. This is, the prawn and the hilsa. That is Dui Gallery Act Shot Justice for Arjikar. And this is very interesting that Mohon Bengal 10, state 0. I mean, probably the only time this can happen. খেলার মাঠ বন্ধ হবে, খেলার বদলে বিচার হবে। There are many such photographs. So just let me stop it. I also refer to the slogans. Probably people who are now listening to this, have participated in this particular talk discussion themselves have voiced these slogans. I can just give you some of these which you all know. Tilottama bhoy nai, Rajpath chhadi nai. Don't be afraid, Tilottama, we haven't left the road. Tilottama rokto hobe na ko ব্যর্থ. Tilottama's blood won't be of no avail. নাটক ছেড়ে বিচার কর, জাস্টিস ফর আরজিকর, গিভ জাস্টিস, লিভিং ড্রামা, জাস্টিস ফর আরজিকর। বিচার তুমি দেবে না, নিস্তার পাবে না। ইফ ইউ ডোন্ট গিভ জাস্টিস ইউ ওন্ট বি স্পেয়ার্ড। শাসক তোমার কিসের ভয়, ধর্ষক তোমার কে হয়? হোয়াট ইজ ইউর ফিয়ার রুলার? হোয়াটস ইউর রিলেশন উইথ দ্য রেপিস্টস? and like many actually, ধর্ষকদের গালে গালে চটি মারো তালে তালে, on the cheeks of rapists slap with your slippers, and so on. And probably the last one also is very important. যতই করবে কণ্ঠরোধ বাড়বে ততই প্রতিরোধ. As much as you suppress our voices, the resistance will increase that much. Finally, last one which I want to just show you is a song, again known to many of you, but I think it's fitting for this particular discussion to have this song played to you. Just 1 second, sharing screen. Just tell me if it is visible.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
চিৎকার কর্মে দেখি কত দূর গলা যায়, আমাদের শুধু মোমবাতি হাতে নীরব থাকার দায়। চিৎকার কর্মে দেখি কত দূর গলা যায়, আমাদের শুধু ধ্বজা ভাঙা রথে এগিয়ে চলার দায়। চিৎকার কর্মে দেখি কত দূর গলা যায়। জন্মের আগে মৃত্যু দিয়েছি, জন্মের পরে ভয়, সকালে বিকালে শরীর আগলে লুকিয়ে বাঁচতে হয়। জন্মের আগে মৃত্যু দিয়েছি, জন্মের পরে ভয়, সকালে বিকালে শরীর আগলে লুকিয়ে বাঁচতে হয়। যদি ভুলচুক হয় কোনোভাবে অসাবধানের বশে, 2 বছরেই ধর্ষিতা তুই, তোরে কিন্তু দোষে। চিৎকার করবে দেখি কত দূর গলা যায়, আমাদের শুধু মোমবাতি হাতে নীরব থাকার দায়। চিৎকার করবে দেখি কত দূর গলা যায়, আমাদের শুধু ধ্বজা ভাঙা রথে এগিয়ে চলার দায়। আরো খানিকটা বড় হলে ওরা ন্যাংটো করবে তোকে, হোল্ডিং জুড়ে তোর খোলা পেট সাপটে গিলবে লোকে। আরো খানিকটা বড় হলে ওরা ন্যাংটো করবে তোকে, হোল্ডিং জুড়ে তোর খোলা পিঠ সাপটে গিলবে লোকে। বিক্রি হবে আরো আছে তোর যা কিছু ব্যক্তিগত, আমরা শুধুই খানিক লোলুপ খানিকটা বিব্রত। চিৎকার করবে দেখি কত দূর গলা যায়, সূর্যের আলো মাখিস না চোখে মুখে, না হলেও খুব চুপি চুপি মাখ, পাছে দেখে ফেলে লোকে। সম্ভব হলে সূর্যের আলো মাখিস না চোখে মুখে, না হলেও খুব চুপি চুপি মাখ, পাছে দেখে ফেলে লোকে। এরপর খোলা রাস্তায় ওরা খেয়ে ফেলে গেলে তোকে, এরপর খোলা রাস্তায় ওরা খেয়ে ফেলে গেলে তোকে। প্রশাসন শুধু হাততালি দিয়ে বেশ্যা বলবে তোকে। চিৎকার কর্মে দেখি কত দূর বলা যায়, আমাদের শুধু মোমবাতি হাতে নীরব থাকার দায়। চিৎকার কর্মে দেখি কত দূর বলা যায়, আমাদের শুধু ধ্বজা ভাঙা রথে এগিয়ে চলার দায়। চিৎকার কর্মে দেখি কত দূর বলা যায়, আমাদের শুধু ধ্বজা ভাঙা রথে এগিয়ে চলার দায়।
So, I mean, that's how I look at Arjikar movement to be perfectly suitable for studying as part of contemporary history. So let me just briefly conclude that I think historians need to be more inclusive in scope, time, subject, and method while studying contemporary history, because she or he has greater accessibility to sources and definitely with greater use of technology. As Baraklo stated at the outset, a new framework and new terms of reference are required for the study of contemporary history. I think that a global and transnational perspective is a must for understanding as much you come close to your own time, with a spirit of innovation, imagination, and corroboration. Without corroboration, as in history we all know, nothing can be studied. So we actually are striving towards a scientific and objective history with an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach, probably with a more comparative and global frame, with a certain amount of openness and dynamism while we study and practice contemporary history. So the methodological strength is very, very significant in this particular approach. And here probably history is a bit different from other social sciences as well. Now, I also want to mention here the significance of the idea of what S.N. Mukherjee talked about, say, nearly 4 decades back, 4 or 5 decades back, rather, the idea of a citizen historian, the historian's social responsibility, to which one of the greatest historical thinkers, Leopold von Ranke, referred to at his final phase of life. The study of a universal history where the history should be a human property. So we need knowledge and understanding of contemporary history. I quote here R.P. Dutt, in order to understand and solve the problems of today, or better probably to come to terms with the future. Here I introduce and conclude with the idea of future past in history, where we can probably connect history through time. Now, it is a common sense view that history deals with the past and the historian has no business talking about the future. E.H. Carr once said that the good historians have future in their bones. But that too is essentially considered to be the vision of a historian embedded in her or his interpretation. However, when any historian pursues contemporary history, the horizons become more open-ended, or for her or him. In contemporary history, the historian has the liberty to come up to the present if the theme of the study requires such a timeline. But is it really possible to include the future into the study of contemporary history? Here I introduce future past. It is my conviction that it is possible to consider the future in studying a continuing past or a past in transition. In such case, the future becomes an integral part of a past which goes beyond the present to take into account the future. The historian in such a context becomes an essential part of the process by which the past delves deep into the future and creates a continuum or connect between the past, present, and future. I call this considered future in the study of contemporary history the future past. The future past becomes viable only after the future becomes a past. But the study of that future commences well before that. That is, when it remains distinctly in the future. The historian plans well with proper methods to study it, contextualizes it within a past historical process, and connects it with the present where the historian is situated. In case of Arjika movement, that is exactly what I have tried to do. I started studying the movement right from the very beginning. I knew that the movement will unfold in different aspects, in different ways, and I would take always look for the developments. The study of future past should open up immense possibilities for interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches to historical studies, thereby making rooms for more sophisticated refinements in historical methodology. Collaboration with other disciplines and adoption of methods from other disciplines are crucial, albeit with the compliance with the basics of historical methodology, where cross-checking and corroboration reigns supreme. The idea of future past obviously poses challenges to sister disciplines like political science, international relations, sociology, economics, media studies, cultural studies, and so on. However, the historian works on the future past in a completely different way from the practitioners of the above disciplines, both thematically and methodologically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful lecture. I now invite anyone who has questions to please put them in the chat box. Okay. So we have a question in the chat box from Ayush. How
Yes.
does Orwell's notion of surveillance and control, as depicted in 1984, resonate in the way the state monitored and potentially suppressed dissent during the RG Core movement?
Okay. Uh, uh, Interesting question. I mean, when you talk about any kind of state approach to a particular protest movement, which is anti-state in particular, uh, the question of surveillance and control becomes very, very important. And not only Orwell, but you can actually apply here the Foucault's idea, the idea of, Bentham's panopticon, uh, to look at these kind of suppressions through a theoretical lens is always useful. But what is important here to understand, whether the nature of state control uh, is different from the way it has been in the past, and with respect to other protest movements, that needs to be taken into account. And definitely Orwell's idea has some resonances in this case.
If anyone wants to unmute their mic and ask a question, you can also go ahead.
No problem if anyone asks in Bengali. I think so. Santan?
Yes, there is no issue at all.
Okay.
Um, Hi, Kaushik. I was typing, but it's better for me to ask a question. Can I ask a question on the mic?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for a wonderful talk. And when Somdata told me about your talk, I was intrigued that a career historian like you is dealing with such a contemporary topic, and now I understand why. So, what I it was really really something that we all grapple with when we work with contemporary topic, and career historians look at us with avid suspicion. So I had three specific questions. The first one is, as you elaborated on the nature of archive and the changing nature of archive time and again, and you have given a lot of examples of how what are those different kinds of archives that we have while studying contemporary history. I was wondering whether you could, elaborate on the fact that this specific changing nature of archives, like the kind of photographs and videos and things that you showed us, uh, how does those archives pose a challenge to the traditional methods of history writing? That is one of my question, because the traditional method of history writing has to deal with these changing nature of archives. So how does it pose a challenge, or how do you as a historian deal with it? That is my question number one. The second question is, when you are dealing with a piece of history, which you said that, like, it's a future past, then you are also part of that history in the making, which means then how you as a historian position yourself in this unraveling time. That is my second question. And the third question is the fact that, when we are dealing with, like what you said, that again, this your idea of the future past is something that yeah, is intriguing me a lot, because generally when you are talking about the objective traditional history, then we have some sort of a linearity in mind. But when you are talking about future past, then it seems to me that you are thinking in a much more non-Western concept, where the time is more circular in nature. So how, because that is something that goes against the grain of traditional history. So how do you want to comment on that? So these are my three questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rajdeep, for this such intriguing queries. And first, with regard to the challenge to the traditional historian, I don't. I mean, it's the way you look at the writing of history. I don't consider it to be a challenge. As I mentioned, probably once only, that contemporary history began when the history writing had begun. I mean, with Herodotus and Thucydides. So, if we say that using the terms ethnography, autoethnography, oral history, they all actually did that. So there is nothing strikingly new, in my opinion. And the way technology has given us opportunity to have new kinds of primary materials, new kind of visual materials, or say photographs, videos, and so on. uh, I think it is probably in the fitness of things that the historians have already understood that across the world. In India, students need to understand that we cannot remain backward in appreciating the significance of these kinds of sources. We have to get on with these sources and try to create the narrative at the earliest. We cannot wait 25, 30 years to study Arjikar movement, or to study 2024 elections, 2014 elections. So that's why we have to take a decision. It's definitely a historian's choice, a scholar's choice. But I think the person who wants to move forward needs to get forward and should be appreciated. You may reject his methodology, you may criticize her point of view, but she or he should not be stopped doing this kind of research. Secondly, uh, the historian becomes a part of this process, which is definitely a very significant challenge. Now, if you ask me as a person whether you are part of the movement or not, that's my personal preference. And when I am writing, when I'm doing history, whether it is ancient history, it is medieval history, modern, contemporary, whatever, I have to tell myself that I'm not going to wear any shirt. I'm not a believer. I'm a firm believer in empirical history. I'm not a believer in kind of theoretical history or a particular perspective-based history. So definitely theories and perspectives come handy for me as well. But it's my sources on which I actually try to prosper. So I always try to do that. Contemporary historian has this greatest challenge. That's why Rajni Dutt said that the historian is actually lying her or his head into the guillotine, actually. And last one, that is the idea of this linearity. that is something that the historians could always confidently pursue. That the linearity gives the historian a kind of confidence and easy. Feels very easy to go ahead with this. But this idea of circular time and 20 to I have done this thrice, and I do this in my classes as well. Students are the greatest listeners to my wild ideas. When the Ram Mandir was inaugurated last year, 22nd, this year, 22nd January, I started studying this inauguration, 6 months back. And I gave them assignments to bring up their views on it before the inauguration and then after the inauguration, and its potential impact on the Lok Sabha election. So that's the way you have to get on with this. And it creates a lot of materials. Not a, the one opinion you get is an opinion which you have to respect. You may not agree with this, but you have to respect all kinds of sources, all kinds of opinions. And that is probably the way forward if you really want to go ahead with this kind of future past, if it at all is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
There's a few more questions in the chat box. I will ask them one by one. Firstly, there's a question from Rakhi. How can Roland Barthes' theory of denotation and connotation be applied to analyze the media's portrayal of the RG Core movement, where the denotative facts of the protests are overshadowed by connotative associations that align with state propaganda?
Okay, Raki, I'm not very good at these theories. I don't have much understanding of, probably superficial understanding of these theories. But you can always, I have already said, you can always use certain theoretical lenses to understand the nature of this protest, the kind of protest that were generated as a result of this movement. So it's definitely your choice whether you can apply it correctly or not. Uh, I have no problems with this. Anyone with different theoretical perspectives can study the movement in its vicissitudes.
Next is a question from S. Chakraborty. Can this protest movement be read as beginning of a new genre of civil protest, or should it be read as a continuity of people's movements in the past?
Yes, probably you're right. Uh, this definitely has created the potential of having a new genre of civil protest in West Bengal, uh, probably also in India. But there were other precedents as well of this kind of protests. But what I mentioned in the discussion on the Arjikor movement, that the apparently quote unquote apolitical protest created a lot of trouble, lot of uneasiness, lot of confusion for the mainstream political parties, political stakeholders, because it was something which they never were confronted with. So that's why the new genre comes in. But probably in future, when we will study Arjikor movement in retrospect, contextualizing it in the continuum of other protest movements, it would seem like one of the protests. But definitely, I think it has opened up possibilities for studying its nature from a different angle. That is a different kind of protest, a politics without the political stakeholders from the mainstream one.
Someone has raised a hand. You may go ahead with your question.
Yes, Srimanti.
Yes, hello Kaushik da.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, popular protests like this, we often term this as new social movements or contemporary popular protests, right? They are always spontaneous. But if we see this Abhaya issue also, I, I hope we will not be wrong to say that politics can defeat these kind of political protests by simply frustrating it, and that is, I think, one of the main character of new social movements It is spontaneous, it is euphoric, it takes a very significant high, but it vanishes very fast. So, how do you think this politics of frustration, can be defeated, and popular protests can get a leverage to have an impact? If you give suggestion from the historical movements, what will be your suggestion? Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it led to a lot of frustration and rejections among the, particularly the opposition political parties, because they could not be able to enter into the movement, manipulate it, appropriate it, which has been the case in the past in India. But again, I just beg to differ from you a bit in the way you define. I mean, look at politics. I think it's a new social movement, definitely new kind of protest movement, but definitely it's a political movement. You don't need to have the political stakeholders from the mainstream politics to make a movement political. It's people's political movement. I mean, that's where it is different from it. I mean, anyone can disagree with me, but I consider it to be a political movement, but from a different perspective. And uh, uh, with regard to this politics of frustration, this is probably for the first time that politicians in West Bengal uh, have tested it, and they have now to devise means and strategies to adjust to this. I mean, changing contours of new social movements in future. But again, one thing that comes to my mind is a question, I mean, a set of questions raised by some of my students in their assignments. They have already done an assignment on Arjikar protest movement, that whether it is really possible to sustain such a new kind of movement without support from or mobilization from political parties or mainstream politics in the long run. That is a question which I also leave to all of you. I don't really know whether it is really possible to sustain this movement in the long run, because ultimately this movement has an anti-establishment character.
Thank you, Kaushik. Hmm.
Someone else has raised a hand also. You may also go ahead with your question.
Thank you, and I'm really sorry to be joining this meeting uh, from my father's phone. My name is Noyoni Basu, and thank you for the talk. And I think this is, it's pretty brave to be talking about this topic right now, and that is that is very hopeful again. I mean, it augurs a lot of hope. So my question is, how do you understand the role of Anando Bajar, the Anando Bajar group, ABP group, and this their channel in this protest?
Okay, I mean, this is a very specific question, very intriguing. Now, I said at the outset that my primary aim is to understand contemporary history through the lens of Arjikar movement. So, if you ask me that I have dealt, whether I have studied the movement itself in fair bit of details, I say no. But again, from a layman's perspective, who is a student of history, I think it's not about Anandabhajar group. It's about the media houses or the electronic media groups who have tried to, I mean, construct and reconstruct the movement from time to time in such a way that, I mean, their representation of the various aspects of the movement reach out to the people. Now, ABP group definitely, not only in case of this movement, but also the events that started rocking, I mean, Bengali media from the month of July, the Bangladesh protest, then the demise of our former Chief Minister Buddhadev Bhattacharya, then Arjikar protest movement, and last but not the least, the present issues in Bangladesh. What strikes me is the way ABP group stuck to the task of continuing way to invest more and more energy in representing this particular movement. Probably one of the longest in the history of the ABP group. It may be because of the reason that nothing very serious happened during this particular continuum. But even then, it was striking. And in the ABP group's representation, particularly ABP Anand, where the talk shows are organized, I'm not talking about the representatives of the political parties or some comic figures who appear on the TV screen every day, but a few commentators whose dialogues have created a kind of consensus, probably among many people, particularly middle class Bengalis, if you say so.
Yes.
Okay. So that probably got reflected in their perception of the movement, and probably that motivated many to join the movement simply because of one reason that Simonti was talking about, that this movement is not that political. I'm not taking the names, two particular commentators in ABP Anando, they have continuously emphasized this point, that this is a domain of politics which Trinamool Congress, BJP, CPM, Congress are all afraid of. This is an unknown zone of politics, very uncomfortable. And that gave confidence to many people who otherwise do not take part in active street politics. So that is something which I think is a phenomenal impact of ABP Anand and probably a few other channels as well.
There's a few more questions in the chat box, and I think we can end with that. Uh, there's two questions from Abidi. How can a student deal with political challenges that may arise due to the ruling party? And secondly, the recent issue of justice for RG Kaur, how this movement impacts the concept of justice. Does this movement pave the way to reconstruct the idea of justice?
Can you repeat the first question once more, please?
How can a student deal with political challenges that may arise due to the ruling party?
I mean, it's not only a question of student. Any human being living in Bengal, in particular, West Bengal in particular, has to deal with this. It's not a challenge. It's something which has posed challenges to our social, political, cultural setup. So it's definitely up to her or him to deal with the challenge. Probably, or maybe you are referring to a student's delicate or vulnerable position in a particular educational institution. But this kind of movement gives the opportunity to many students who otherwise do not come out on the streets. But this has provided that opportunity, and I have seen many, thousands of students coming out to the street in favor of the movement. Although there were others who made their appearances in a bit different way, although in favor of the movement, but in favor of certain political parties. That's a different issue. And secondly, Shantan, sorry, once more, please.
Yes, the second question was the recent issue of justice for RG Kaur, how this movement impacts the...
I mean, the idea of justice, or the way justice prevails, justice is delayed, justice eludes us, is nothing new. I don't think it's going to change in any way, because our judiciary, our legal system acts in a certain way. You cannot change it. But definitely it creates pressure. These civic protests, this kind of pressure by the people probably makes the judiciary more accountable. We always talk about the accountability of all other institutions, but we always skip the judiciary because it will be a contempt of court. But remember, judiciary comprises human beings. So there can be mistakes, there can be delays, and so on. So we have to see whether really this kind of movement, the pressure of the movement can accelerate the process of justice, can create a space where we can also convey our feelers, messages to the judiciary, people involved in the judiciary actively. Be it a judge or an advocate or other stakeholders, that there are certain things, there are certain areas where there is no question of a gray area. You have to act, and justice has to prevail, justice has to come. Otherwise, what should I say? In 2024, you see what is happening in Bangladesh right now, what has happened in India in the last 10 years or so. So justice has to come. Otherwise, people would always lose faith in the justice. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we say one thing, that we will see in the court if there is a serious offense. So that's the way forward, probably.
Yes, I think we're out of time now. So thank you, sir, for joining us today, and thank you for your wonderful lecture and your very thoughtful insights on the movement, especially from the perspective of sports and other contemporary media. I thank everyone who joined us for the lecture today, and good evening.
Thank you. It was a pleasure joining you.